Eugene Kiely is here tonight as the featured speaker for the Arthur J. Holland Ethics in Government program, which is centered at the Eagleton Institute. Before I introduce him, I want to tell you a little bit about another Rutgers alum, the man for whom this annual event is named. Arthur J. Holland was the mayor of the city of Trenton for almost 30 years. First elected in 1959, he became well known for his openness to the public and the ethical standards of his administration. His national reputation was such that his colleagues chose him to serve as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and stories of the transparent government he led, years before anybody really used that phrase of transparent in that way, are still remembered and often retold. Holland was an undergraduate in the Rutgers class in 1954 and a graduate student here as well. In 1989, shortly after his death, the university established this program to remember Mayor Holland and to help build from his legacy. In addition to presenting at least one public program on the New Brunswick campus each year, the Holland program also convenes a session at the annual League of Municipalities convention in Atlantic City. This year, on November 14th, former U.S. Attorney Paul Fishman will be the keynote speaker for the Holland program panel entitled Gray Areas in Local Ethics and How to Navigate Them. For the Eagleton Institute, overseeing the Holland program has special resonance because two members of the family are graduates of the Eagleton Fellowship Program. Art's wife, Betty Holland, was in the first class of Eagleton Fellows in 1958, and their son, Matt, was an Eagleton Fellow a mere 36 years later in 1994. And both Betty and Matt are here, as well as most of the Holland family is right here. So welcome to you all. Thank you all for coming. The Arthur J. Holland program seeks to promote ethics in government, a phrase that can be defined in many ways. We mean it as women and men setting and implementing government policies and programs in ways they believe are for the greater good and not motivated by considerations of any personal gain or advantage they or their associates might receive. And while not too long ago we thought it unnecessary to add, we also mean ethics in government to include an insistence on decision-making that employs only the most accurate and reliable available information. Throughout history, it has always been a challenge to identify the truth about any subject. But now the search for truth requires navigating through an ever-increasing volume of material, much of which is incorrect and some of which is deliberately false. How do we respond to this challenge, both as individuals and as a society? Our guest tonight wrestles with these issues every day. Eugene Kiely came to Rutgers in 1977 as a freshman hoping to become a sports reporter. He wrote for the Targum and then got a job as a part-time sports reporter for the Courier News in Bridgewater. Upon graduation, he entered full-time professional journalism, working for small papers in Illinois and California before returning to New Jersey. Here he worked for the Observer in Toms River and then the Bergen Record as Trenton State House bureau chief, the Philadelphia Inquirer as Pennsylvania state editor, and at USA Today as Washington assignment editor. While working at the Record, he also spent 2 years in Washington covering the New Jersey congressional delegation. After more than 20 years covering government and politics as a journalist, Kiely was named director of factcheck.org in 2010. Originally from North Bergen, New Jersey, he now resides in Newtown, Pennsylvania. His topic tonight is finding and facing facts in campaigns and government. Please join me in welcoming Eugene Kiely.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks to the Holland family for having this. For me, this is like coming home. Seeing familiar faces of people I worked with, people who taught me. This is quite an experience for me. This is great. As John mentioned, I entered journalism as a student at Livingston, hoping to become a sports reporter. At Targum, I covered bowling. The headline writers love to call them keglers. But my experiences here changed me. It's where I saw John Anderson give a speech at the old barn when he was running for president. It's here where I took Tom Hartman's class, Suburban Politics. I didn't know it at the time, but I learned something in Professor Hartman's class that I would use for a couple of decades. And he taught me the roadmap for the partisan divide in New Jersey between the urban Democratic communities off the Turnpike and the suburban Republican communities off the Parkway. This being New Jersey, the question, not surprisingly, came down to what exit are you from? It's here where I worked on a research project for Gerald Pomper's book. Professor Pomper is in the back of the classroom, and it's great to see him. I pored over countless newspaper articles for that book. My job was to try to code them, the kind of campaign coverage that candidates were getting in news articles. So I went through it meticulously, logging this coverage. Was the article positive and negative? Was it about political strategy? Was it about issues and the like? So the professor boiled down my hours and hours of research to one single sentence. He got me used to working for USA Today, I'll tell you. But I did get a mention in the book, in a footnote, and for that it was quite an honor. I'm particularly happy to be speaking at Eagleton because I've long used Eagleton as a resource when I was a reporter at the Bergen Record and the Philadelphia Inquirer, as John had mentioned. And here's a fact, I looked this up. I mentioned the Eagleton Institute in 70 stories that I had written in my career, and that's at least the number, because as an editor, I would also tell reporters, go talk to someone at Eagleton. Ruth Mandel didn't know this, and I had to tell her today, but she helped me get a job at the Bergen Record. My assignment when I was a job candidate on this week trial was to write about the topic of women in politics. So who else would I call except Ruth Mandel? And she made me look smart. The story got on the front page, and I got a job. I worked with Cliff Zukin, who was in charge of the Eagleton Bergen Record poll in the early 1990s when I was the Trenton bureau chief. And then there was Ross Baker, who I think I had on speed dial. I would call him all the time for information. Anytime I wrote a political story, particularly in Congress when I was down in Washington as covering the New Jersey delegation. So Ross, Cliff, Ruth, they're all such thoughtful, wonderful people to talk to with politics, which brings me to why I'm here today, is to talk about politics and factcheck.org. I wanted to start out by playing a clip a clip of what put factcheck.org on the map.
While he was CEO of Halliburton, they paid millions of dollars in fines for providing false information on their company, just like Enron and Ken Lay.
Mr. Vice President?
I could respond, Gwen, but it's going to take more than 30 seconds.
Well, that's all you got.
Ladies and gentlemen, you just witnessed a rare failure of the legendary Cheney charm. Oh, really? How can I turn that 30 seconds into 60? Cornered! Cheney pounced.
The reason they keep mentioning Halliburton is because they're trying to throw up a smoke screen. They know the charges are false. They know that if you go, for example, to factcheck.com, an independent website sponsored by the University of Pennsylvania, you can get the specific details with respect to Halliburton.
Actually, funny story. If you go to factcheck.com, you'll be rerouted and learn that George Bush is endangering our safety and must not be reelected in a message from billionaire investor George Soros. So, there's actually a slight factual error. Cheney actually had a factual error on his fact check reference. What Cheney meant to say was factcheck.org, which is a nonpartisan clearinghouse of politicians' statements, which leads today with an item about, yes, how Cheney got their web address wrong.
I love that clip. So factcheck.org has been around since 2003. 15 years this December. We're the oldest continuous political fact-checking website in the United States. It wasn't my career goal to become director of factcheck.org, but newspapers were weakened by a business model that didn't work anymore. My last job at USA Today was as a congressional editor, a dream job for me. But then this opportunity came up to be the director of factcheck.org. And FactCheck, like Eagleton, has long been a resource for me as a reporter. I respected the work that they did, and I was eager to go to an organization that where I thought I could learn a lot. And I did. I thought I knew everything after being in journalism for 29 years, but it turned out I did not. So I want to talk about what it is that we do, how we do it, and why I think fact-checking is more important than ever at a time when some think truth isn't truth, as Rudy Giuliani put it. So looking at our three different processes of selecting an article to write about, or a claim to research and write about, how we go about writing it, and then the editing process that goes into it, which is all very rigorous. So our focus at FactCheck is on public policy and the major U.S. political figures. That is, any person or political organization that's seeking to influence public policy. That starts with the president, his cabinet, and White House officials. It includes the House and Senate leaders of both parties, the congressional chairmen and ranking committee members on key committees, candidates for federal office, and groups that are spending millions of dollars trying to get them elected or help defeat them. There are three steps, as I mentioned: selecting a claim to write about. When selecting a claim to write about, the first one is we devote an equal amount of time to reviewing claims that are made by Democrats and Republicans. It may not turn out that at the end of the day we're writing an equal balance, but we start out at a process of reviewing both parties equally. For example, every Monday we review the transcripts for the Sunday talk shows. During the week we review transcripts of the daily political shows like The Morning Joe and CNN's New Day. Every day we review the remarks by the president. When Congress is in session, we'll review the transcripts of the weekly leadership briefings that are given by both the House and Senate Democrats and Republicans. During this midterm election, we're focused in particular on 10 competitive state Senate races. These are the races that are going to receive a lot of the money, and the TV ads in those races, we'll review all of them. Because we have a service that provides us with these TV ads within 24 hours that they appear in any market in those 10 different states. So you can go on our website, and there's something called Our Process, and you can get more information about how we go about this process. What we're trying to do by looking at going about this in a systematic way is to avoid something called selection bias. And that's when you're selecting something based on your personal interests or the editor's personal interests, but not necessarily have a fair process to review claims. We consciously seek to avoid selection bias at FactCheck. We do have a pecking order, though, and it starts with the president. That's the priority, given the immense power of the office. It's because of our selection process that we reviewed a transcript of President Obama speaking at a town hall meeting in Colorado on health care, and we have a clip to show you on that. Oh, wrong president. We'll get to him later.
At the same time, I just want to be completely clear about this. I keep on saying this, but somehow folks aren't listening. If you like your health care plan, you keep your health care plan. Nobody's going to force you to leave your health care plan. If you like your doctor, you keep seeing your doctor. I don't want government bureaucrats meddling in your health care, but the point is I don't want insurance company bureaucrats meddling in your health care either.
He did keep saying it. He kept saying it over and over again, and we kept writing about it. We wrote about it back in 2009, that he was wrong. We wrote it in 2010, we wrote it in 2011. It wasn't until 2013 when the Affordable Care Act market, the marketplace opened up, that there was the realization that some of these plans don't meet the minimum standards for the Affordable Care Act, and they were canceled. And there was this uproar that affected not only, he apologized for it, but it affected his party, and it affected the midterm elections. So that wasn't true. And we came upon that by looking at all of the transcripts that is available for the president, and they post them on the White House website, and we get them sent to us within an hour or two of these remarks being made by whether it's President Obama or now President Trump. In terms of the research process, after identifying possible claims to write about, like this one on health insurance, the first thing we do is go to the person making the claim and ask them, what is your evidence? The burden of proof is on the person making the claim. It's not on us. And if they can't prove it, there's no evidence. Or if we find through our research that it's inaccurate, it's false. Or if we find that the information is true but misleading because it leaves out information, or it spins information, or it manipulates information and data, then we'll say that it's misleading. A surprising number of times, the information that comes from a campaign or the White House or whoever it is that's making these claims doesn't prove that they're right. It proves that they're not only maybe wrong or maybe perhaps misleading. The supporting material may show that they're cherry-picking information, taking information out of context, or not telling the whole story. For example, during the 2016 campaign, a Republican super PAC that was trying to deny Donald Trump the nomination aired a TV ad on gun rights. It showed a clip of Trump saying, "I hate the concept of guns. I'm not in favor of it," and said that he was then opposed to guns. The full quote, though, showed that in typical Trump speak, he said one thing and then said another thing, all in the same space of time. But the full quote showed that he supports gun rights, he owns several guns, and he thinks that if guns are banned, then only bad guys will have guns. So that there was some creative editing that went into that TV ad. In a few cases, the person or group making a claim won't respond to us at all. Sometimes you can't even contact the organization because it's these dark money organizations that spring up. You don't know who their donors are. You don't know a contact for them. They don't even have a website in some cases. So if they don't provide information to us, then we're going to be doing our own research on it. And when we do research on, we're looking at primary sources of information. We go to the SEC if we're looking for corporate records. If we're looking for tax data, we go into the IRS. If you're looking for economic data, you go into the Bureau of Economic Analysis. The energy information has information on data, gas, oil, and energy sources. Our co-founder of factcheck.org, Kathleen Holt Jamieson, who is the dean of the School for Communication at University of Pennsylvania, she refers to these organizations as the custodians of knowledge. So when Donald Trump, then a candidate, said that the unemployment rate could be as high as 42%, we went to the campaign and asked him, well, where'd you get that number from? And we got no answer. Getting information out of the campaign was very difficult. But we went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they have 6 different ways of measuring unemployment, and official unemployment rate and other ways of measuring it. And none of them said unemployment was as high as 42%. Surprise, surprise. When Nancy Pelosi said 1 in 5 children in America goes to sleep hungry at night, her office did respond. They referred us to a report written by the Department of Agriculture on food security. But the report didn't support what she said. Once we do our research, write our story, then it goes through several layers of editing and review. By the time we publish a story, typically there'll be 4 different people who are involved, who were not involved in the story, who are involved in reviewing the story before publication. We have a line editor who reviews the story for clarity, tone, substance, context. Is the choice of language precise and accurate? Is the author using loaded language or advocacy language? Does the story provide the proper context? Is the author writing around holes in a story to cover up gaps of knowledge? Because if we don't know something, we tell the reader that. It's as important to tell readers what we don't know as it is to tell them what we do know. For the fact-checking process, the author must provide fact-checking, the fact-checker who's doing the story with documents and data that support every single fact that's in that story, and provide links to the information in the story so our readers, if they so choose, can click on those links, review the information for themselves, and hopefully come to the same conclusion as we did about the accuracy of the statement that was made. So now you know a little bit about our process. What's it like fact-checking in a time of alternative facts and when truth isn't truth? It is exhausting, first of all. The campaign never seemed to end. But for our purposes, for in most cases, it's really the same. The process is the same. We still follow the same process. We check the Sunday show transcripts, the Daily Show transcripts, the leadership press briefings, and our priority remains the president. And this is where it gets different. If you go to our homepage, you'll notice that there are a lot of stories about President Trump. His supporters noticed too. One reader, Ken, wrote to us about it. His subject line was obvious liberal bias. He wrote, "It's disappointing to hear that factcheck.org is deciding what's true and what's not for we the sheeple. I just perused several of your pages and the overwhelming anti-Trump bias is obvious." Another reader, Robert, sent an email with no text, just a very long subject line, that said, "Does Donald Trump get all of his facts wrong? You never print anything positive. And I did not vote for him. You're very biased." That was the subject line. So I explained to Ken and Rob what our process is, just as I laid it out here, and how we get into disputes with the Obama White House when he was in office and the campaign, the Obama campaign, when he was running for re-election. During the 2012 re-election, the Obama campaign issued a 12-page press release attacking one of our stories and me personally, since I wrote it. The fact is that we hold President Trump to the same standards of accuracy that we held President Obama to. It just so happens that President Trump is very active. He's very outspoken, more so than Obama and Bush. He's outspoken on Twitter, at cabinet meetings, at the Oval Office press ops, at joint press conferences with heads of state, at political rallies. In fact, his campaign officially launched his re-election on the same day that he was inaugurated. And a month later, he held his first political rally. So this is very different. This is no other president has been this active this early. So naturally, we have a lot of material to write about. And frankly, he stands out from other politicians for the sheer number of false claims and his brazen refusal to admit error when proven wrong. In fact, we don't even write about every statement that's wrong or misleading. We didn't write about his tweet that most NFL money goes to players. We didn't write when he tweeted that his poll numbers among Republicans are better than Abraham Lincoln. I don't know that Cliff Zukin was around to do the poll for that. Or that 96% of Google searches for Trump news are from the left-wing media. Instead, we focus on public policy. After all, we're a project of the Annenberg Public Policy Center. We want to make sure that people understand how the new tax law will affect them. For example, both parties like to muddy the waters on this issue. During the tax debate, Nancy Pelosi said the Republican plan, quote, raises taxes on the middle class, while President Trump called it, quote, a middle-class miracle. So which is it? That's where we come in and we lay out exactly how the plan is projected to affect the middle class. however you want to define middle class. So this is a particularly interesting time to be a fact checker because there are so many major issues at stake: healthcare, trade, taxes, immigration, and climate change. I have a clip here of the president speaking at a rally in Pennsylvania talking about immigration.
So we're going to have not lottery where you pick it out. Ladies and gentlemen, our first lottery winner, you know, they think we're playing like a game show. Our first lottery winner, let's see, he has 7 convictions for death. He's killed 9 people. And we're getting him the hell out of our country and giving them to the stupid politicians that have been running the United States for many years. And we're going to send him up there because he just won the lottery. Congratulations. Congratulations. Yeah.
So pretty much everything he just said there is wrong. He's talking about the diversity immigration visa program. I'm just interested. How many people have heard of this program? All right, so fair number. That's good. Well, for those of you who don't know, the diversity visa program issues up to 50,000 immigration visas a year to qualified applicants from the countries with low rates of immigration to the United States. I emphasize qualified because Trump is constantly misrepresenting this program. This is one example, but I could give you 10 others where he said the same exact thing. In this clip, he jokes, if I can call it a joke, that this lottery winner killed 9 people. It's not a random lottery that anybody can win. In fact, in order to qualify, diversity visa applicants have to pass a criminal background check. So murderers need not apply. And that's just one of the eligibility requirements before they can get a green card. They're subject to the same rules as any other green card applicant. He's also wrong when he says that countries are gaming the program and dumping their worst people on us. Individuals, not countries, are the ones who decide to fill out an application. He gets one thing right, although he even distorts that, and that the program uses a computer to randomly select those who will get visas. But that's because the program attracts more than 1 million applicants each year. So the United States uses this random computerized system in order to select from among the qualified candidates. Again, I emphasize qualified. So why is it important that we know about how the tax cut plan is going to affect individuals or how the diversity plan works? Well, if we're going to have an honest public debate about public policy, then we need to know and agree on a basic set of facts. If you want to get rid of the diversity visa program, fine. But you should understand how it works before you decide to get rid of it. Quickly, 4 other distortions made by the president on major policy issues. The tax bill he signed is not the biggest tax cut in history. The GDP growth is not at or even close to a record high. The wall that he proposes to build will not stop Mexican cartels from smuggling drugs into the United States. And U.S. farmers have not been on a downward trend for 15 years, and because of bad trade deals. He says these things to marshal public support for his agenda, just as President Obama was doing the same on health care. As I said at the top of my talk, I've learned a lot at being at factcheck.org. Some of this information that I've learned along the way, I think, would apply for commentators on cable television if they so choose, as well as individuals at family get-togethers. So number one is to be transparent. It's important to us at FactCheck, and it should be for all journalists, to be as transparent as possible, especially now when just basic facts are in dispute. We provide attribution for every statement that we write, and we provide links to them in the story. So our readers can essentially fact check us. I often get asked, who fact checks the fact checkers? And our response is, you do. The links are there. You can check it yourself. I'm surprised in this information age that we're in that a lot of news organizations don't do that. I read stories and listen to news broadcasts differently now. Reporters write with the voice of God, as we call it. That is, they write a statement without any attribution. Unless it's an accepted fact, such as Donald Trump's the 45th President of the United States, then it needs attribution and should have a link. There are fewer and fewer accepted facts. Number two is to be skeptical but not cynical. This is hard. This is a favorite expression of our co-founder, Brooks Jackson, who was an investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press, and CNN. We should all be skeptical of what we read and hear, especially now when there's one part information and three parts misinformation. This is what drives us as fact checkers. We're skeptical of what we read and hear and check it out for ourselves. That's our job. I know it gets harder for the public to do this, harder and harder. That's why we exist. But it's equally important not to get cynical, because if we give up, if we get cynical, we don't trust anybody, if we have no trust in institutions and in the media, then we're going to get to a place where there's going to be a suppression of voter turnout and an erosion in democracy. Number three is don't assume. This is a journalist's blind spot, and it's particularly hazardous to fact checkers. You can't assume that you understand what the person meant or said, or what that source that the person had in mind when they made that statement. That's the first thing that we do, as I mentioned, is go to the person who makes the claim and ask them what information did they have that supports their claim. I'm going to date myself here, but Felix Unger said it best when he said, "Don't assume because you make an ass of you and me." A-S-S-U-M-E. 4 is listen, and I mean really listen, actively listen. Don't accept blindly when someone says something just because you like that person or agree with that person. And don't conversely reject what someone on the other side says, because no political party and no politician is right all the time or wrong all the time. This is why we review transcripts when they're available, rather than just listen to what someone says. It becomes just words on a paper, black and white, and rather than having this familiar voice that might influence your thinking, you're actually looking at it on a piece of paper. Number 5 is to appeal to reason and not emotions. It's important that we write our articles in neutral language. Yeah, we come to conclusions and we'll say right at the top, this is false, this is misleading, but we support how we come to that conclusion without sarcasm, without opinions, without loaded words, without snarky comments. We don't even use adjectives for the most part. So these aren't just lessons for fact checkers and journalists, as I said, but for all of us, especially now when we're in such a divided time. We need to be civil with each other. We need to treat each other with respect. If you're going to take issue with something that Trump said or Pelosi did, then get your facts straight. Be transparent. Where'd you get your information from? Hopefully from factcheck.org. If someone says something you don't believe is true, well, ask them where they got their information from. Quite simply, it's important to listen to each other. You'll be surprised what happens. Earlier, I mentioned a reader, Ken, who accused us of having an overwhelming anti-Trump bias. I wrote him back, described our process, explained how we hold the president to the same standard we held Obama, gave him some past links to stories. And he wrote back and he said, "Thank you for your thoughtful response. I appreciate the fact that you responded at all. And especially you went to all the trouble to detail your impartiality. You have changed my impression of your organization in a positive way." We know from studies that have been done about fact-checking that it can increase your knowledge, but people have to read it. I don't know if Ken's going to give us a second chance, but the research shows that Republicans view fact-checking less favorably than Democrats do, so the chances probably aren't good. But our hope for surviving in this rancorous period of partisan divide is to stay informed and be civil. And that's why we exist. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
How many people work with you?
We have 7 full-time people right now, 1 part-time, the founder who works 1 day a week from his house, and 4 undergraduate students. We have a fellowship program for those students, and they help us do research and go through the transcripts, so we have a lot of eyeballs on the material.
Hi, I'm curious, there's been a lot of hand-wringing about the word lie.
Right.
And I'm curious what you think about that word and its
Right.
use and when it is or isn't appropriate. It sounds like something you wouldn't necessarily do, but how do you react to it?
Yeah, you're right, we don't do it. Our reasoning is, and I know the New York Times put it on the front page saying Trump's a liar. Our reasoning is we don't know what the person speaking had in mind. We're not mind readers. So it really, the word lie goes to intent. This person purposely tried to mislead us. Or is the person purposely trying to mislead himself or herself? You know, they may believe this to be true. And it's interesting, some of the, reading some of the excerpts of the books that are coming out now about the Trump administration, which is also amazing that it's coming out so soon in somebody's administration, is that some of the things he is saying privately are the same things he's saying publicly, and he's wrong privately and publicly. So does he believe this to be true or not? So we don't do that unless it's recorded somewhere where we can say there was some email that showed that they knew about this and purposely misrepresented. We wouldn't call it a lie.
Hey, Gene,
Joe?
I assume we both have had that sinking feeling of printing a correction in the newspaper, especially when I was a young reporter. What do you do? If you make a mistake, what do? How do you fix it?
We correct it. We'll and put a correction at the bottom of the story. Anytime we do any update to a story, we're fully transparent in what it is that we did to that story. And that's another thing that, frankly, I find a little disheartening about journalism today is changes are made in the stories without telling the reader what the change was and why they did that. And then you'll have a conservative media outlet saying, well, the New York Times changed its headline, and they did this one time where they changed a headline, they changed big parts of the story, and there's no explanation at the bottom of the story that corrected it. So that's what we do. Luckily, knock on wood, we haven't had anything where we had to like retract an entire story or anything. But we're also very precise in our language. We're not going to say something is false, even if it appears to be just blatantly false, unless we have evidence. So we'll say there's no evidence that Barack Obama is wiretapping the Trump Tower, because we can't prove a negative.
What about the long-term or the gross public effect? Does fact-checking make voters even more cynical about the political process because now you got an authoritative group saying they're lying or
right.
They're not saying the quite truth? Or does it increase public concern for this and therefore provide a safeguard? And one index of that would be, how's your audience? Is it getting bigger? Are you, or not?
Right. Of course, Professor Pomper would come up with 3 good questions all at once. Our audience got very, very large in 2016. I mean, by 2-3 times larger than we've ever seen. And then it tailed off once the president took office, and it's now starting to rebound again as we're getting into the midterms. People were just tuned out after the election, and now they're coming back. So there's that increase. Also, we saw, in addition to just readership, we have partnerships with news organizations like MSN, USA Today, the Philadelphia Inquirer, NBC, all the Gannett papers and TV stations. They run our stuff because we're a nonprofit. Our policy is steal our stuff. They can run our stuff on their websites. And we get millions and millions of page views on that. MSN, not MSNBC, but MSN, which is the Microsoft news aggregator. We got something in the neighborhood of like 15 million views just on our stories in 2016. So in addition to reaching people on our website, we're also reaching people on other platforms as well. We also do a weekly video fact check with CNN. Jake Tapper, we've been doing this since September of 2015. We do weekly fact checks with a Pittsburgh radio station and a Connecticut public radio station. So we're reaching people that way too. And our donations, because since 2010 we've been taking public donations. And those donations went through the roof in 2016. We got $200,000, which was twice as much as we had gotten any other year. So we're getting more people interested in fact-checking. Now, does it help or hurt? That's a very good question. I can't tell you if it makes people more cynical, because there's been no research done on that. And that's a very good question. And it's been a debate, actually, between us and PolitiFact, because PolitiFact does statements that are true or mostly true. We don't write those, because we feel that with the resources we have, we should be focusing on telling people about misinformation, not when they get it right, because they're supposed to be getting it right. We're not giving bonus points. But it could make people more cynical if they feel that they're seeing their stories that they're always lying. Like this guy Robert was complaining, is Trump wrong about everything? Why don't you do something positive? Well, we're not a public relations firm. We're not going to be doing positive stories about candidates. We'll defend them if there's statements being made about them that's inaccurate, but we're not going to write positive stories. But we do know that fact-checking does increase knowledge, because they've done studies on that. So to the extent that we can bring people in to read our stuff, whether it's through CNN or MSN or wherever, that hopefully is a benefit.
Hi. As an example, you mentioned about that the government is claiming that the tax cuts are going to benefit the middle class, but now that's a very vague, it's very difficult to define. Some study may show that it would benefit, and another study or analysis could show that it will not benefit. So how do you decide which analysis or study to follow and which to disregard? It's kind of very difficult, right?
Yeah, well, there are certain sources and resources that we use in that example. So you're talking about going to the Congressional Budget Office, which does an analysis. These are nonpartisan organization that does these kinds of analysis for Congress. So that's one source. The Joint Committee on Taxation. They work with CBO. That's another nonpartisan organization. They work with CBO on these reports. There's an organization called the Tax Policy Center, which does similar kind of analysis. There's the Ed Wharton. There's a project with it, and all of them. There's a consensus of what effect it's going to have on different income groups. So we can write with some certainty that there's at least a consensus that here's how it's going to affect certain income groups. And that's all we can do. Yeah.
definitely want to encourage any students who have any questions as well. We love hearing from all of you, but just want to make that announcement.
You mentioned that Obama's "you'll be able to keep your insurance, you'll be able to keep your doctor" had an impact on the midterm election. Have you seen anything so far in Trump's misrepresentations that could affect the midterm elections, other than his normal day-to-day actions?
That's a good question. There's so many things. It seemed like the Democrats were having a hard time in 2016 and again now in 2018 to come up with a message that's focused on one particular thing, because there's just so much. The Democrats have been going hard on the tax cuts not benefiting the middle class, although Nancy Pelosi said that. They're more focusing on that it's a tax giveaway to the rich. So that's one thing that they're focusing on. But I don't, frankly, see a cohesive message in these races so far, which is not good, probably, for the Democrats.
Come back over here.
Either of us? Did you want me to go first?
No, I have a question for you.
So I don't think I knew this. So I just wanted to, oh, I do, okay. I just wanted to ask about your experience actually convincing people to check facts, or to care, basically. So in my experience, trying to convince people of an argument, I study philosophy, so I'm a little bit excessive, but and it's not always right, like logic that people rely on. Right. Like emotion is incredibly persuasive in politics. But my question is, sort of, you can show people statistics all day, you can cite sources, and people may not believe the source, or people may not want to follow through. Right. People might think your source is biased. How do you, and then what people will frequently do, in my experience, is say, well, that's not my experience, right? Like, my experience doesn't align with that article, so it can't be true.
Right.
Can you comment at all in your own experience, like, how that's gone? Like,
well, that's been my experience.
Okay.
You pretty much just said, yeah, you answered your own question. But the only thing we can do is to put the information out there, and that's why I come to organizations like this to speak. I went to Pensacola, which is a very conservative area, and gave a similar speech at the time to try to reach out to everybody, and also to do that through MSN, USA Today, all these other news organizations. There, our only hope is to reach as many people as we can possibly can, and at least provide them the information. I mean, it's like, taking a horse to water. The water's there, and people decide to use it, great. But, sorry.
Thank you. My question is, it seems that Fox News, people who watch Fox News have one set of beliefs, and that if all they watched was Fox News, I tried to do it for a while, and I said, yeah, that's true. And then you switch the channel to CNN or MSNBC, you have a different set of beliefs. And my question is there factual? Is something in your organization, or can you come up and say, okay, Fox News, are you really wrong? Are they wrong 90% of the time? Can you compare factually these networks?
Right. My advice is to shut the TV off. Don't listen to MSNBC, CNN, or Fox News. Apologies to Jake Tapper, since we work with him. But, I mean, we don't fact-check pundits, political pundits. But a lot of the stuff that they're talking about, we've already fact-checked and it's available on our website. Again, it goes to, leading the horse to water. For example, one of the very popular misconceptions among Fox News and the president has repeated a million times, is that Hillary Clinton gave away 20% of the country's uranium, and that it was exported to Russia. None of that's true. It just, and we get down into the weeds and explain why that's not true and what her role was and all that. But it's so, frankly, technical, and just people glaze over. They aren't going to listen. It's a lot easier to say Hillary Clinton gave away 20% of the U.S. uranium, rather than to explain, well, she was a member of one committee that took a vote. There's 10 members on the committee, or 11, or whatever it was, and it wasn't 20%. It was really just, it's just, one thing after another. It didn't go to Russia. I mean, there were just so many misstatements made about that. I did an article on that, just here are the facts about uranium one. And again, we try to do it in a way that is not loaded, not partisan, not just strictly here are the facts about this particular case, if you care to read it. And that's, I don't know what, how to address those. There's always going to be people on both sides that are partisan, and they strongly hold their beliefs, and they're not going to be shaken from it. All we can do is hopefully deal with the people in the middle who really do want to find out what the facts are and what the truth is, and hopefully come to our side.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question, and thank you for making the time to come and speak to us tonight. You mentioned at the end of your remarks the difference between Democrats and Republicans when it comes to trusting fact checks.
Yeah.
And I'm curious whether or not you think that's actually indicative of a more worrisome trend among Republicans, or if it's merely that their leader at this moment puts out more untruths, and if it were Democrats, then the situation would be flipped.
Well, it predates Donald Trump. In fact, that study predates Donald Trump. So this is something that the president has taken advantage of. It's an issue that existed already. There is a decreasing lack of trust in the mainstream media. It's the Washington Post, New York Times, the failing New York Times, whoever, So there's that, and now the president, by having this assault on free press, is making that situation worse. Yeah, I don't know. I think you were the one who talked about strengthening that muscle, and that we're going through a stress period now, and hopefully at some point when we get back to some more evidence-based reality world, that we'll be better off for it. But it was a problem before, and it's a problem now, and it's worse than it was.
First of all, thank you so much for what you do. We need it desperately.
Thank you.
2 questions. What is the time frame between a statement and your ability to fact check it? Mm-hmm. And secondly, what percentage of statements are unable to be fact checked?
Well, the time between turning it around would be depending on the statement, but it'd be anywhere from 2 or 3 hours to a week, depending on how complicated and difficult it is. When the president says something that is on a topic of great interest to a lot of people, we try to get on that as quickly as we can. As I said, the president is the priority. In terms of the number of facts that we don't check, well, again, it depends. If it's the president, we are going through every single remark that he makes, every single tweet, every single speech that he gives, every political rally, because we have access to all that, and that's what we do. And we'll go through a speech, and maybe there'll be 12 things that we could write about. And we've already written about 9 of them before. Well, we're not going to write about them again. Sometimes we do, if it's particularly, if we've taken a new twist on it. But we're not going to write about them all again. Now, I know the Washington Post is keeping track. They're up to like 5,000 now. It includes a lot of repeats. And he's repeating himself now a lot because he's out on the campaign trail trying to get people to vote for Republicans in the midterms. All the other people, the Nancy Pelosi's and the like, the fact is that there aren't a lot of statements that are made by these people that are fact-checkable. There's a lot of, not Nancy Pelosi, we fact-check her a lot, actually. Bad example. But Mitch McConnell, we haven't written about him in 2 years. I think August of 2015, 3 years, is the last time we did something on him when he was running, I think, for re-election. But he's very careful in what he says. He doesn't say much. And what he does say is a lot of opinion or process. He talks a lot about process, But so we are going through these things, but we're not seeing a lot, and we're not writing about a lot. So that would be a great study to do, like take a month period and look at all the statements made by all the people that I just mentioned and see how many we're getting, how many we're not. So if there's a research grant available, maybe Eagleton can do that. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. Great presentation. What I wanted to ask is, in our legislative policy-making seminar for Eagleton Fellows, we often have lively discussions. And one of our discussions was around the responsibility of media in non-biased reporting and journalism, as well as the responsibility of everyday people to know that they need to be able to discern certain information. My concern comes in thinking about everyday people and what their understanding may be around media in terms of what is a reliable source, what isn't. And so what does factcheck.org do, if anything, around media literacy? And, what's the direction to go into to even raise awareness of what's a trustworthy source, what isn't, and, encouraging people to really start to check the facts?
Yeah. No, that's a very good question. In fact, we were talking at dinner about the need for media literacy because the lines are getting blurred between these political pundits who go on cable news and espouse opinions and then turn around and deliver the news 2 hours later or 2 hours before, and having news reporters as guests on programs and talking about their stories. So the lines get blurred between what's opinion and what's news, and it's getting worse and worse. In terms of what we do, at the moment, we're just going to be unveiling something in next month that deals with the so-called fake news problem, not the Donald Trump fake news version, but the false information, that viral information that goes on social media. Coming out with a game that is targeted towards high school students so they can learn media literacy as they're going through this game and game points and stuff like that. So that's one thing that we're doing. Before I got to FactCheck, there was something called factchecked.org, which was the educational component of it. It had lessons that teachers can use in the classroom. It's still available because we're the Annenberg Public Policy Center. They have something called the civics classroom. So that and other information is available, resources for teachers to use. We did a survey of our readership at one point, and there was a high percentage of teachers that were coming to our site and using the material. So it's not enough, is the short answer. More needs to be done, and more needs to be done at every level for people to understand, because back in the old days, it was 3 networks. There was PBS, and there was a Washington Post and New York Times, and now there's podcasts, and there's, cable news, and it's exploded. This information is overwhelming people. So more needs to be done to try to teach people what, or at least give them the tools so they can come to their own conclusions about what media they're going to trust and why.
I have two related questions.
Are you allowed to get a question?
No. I don't need an answer. To what extent do candidates or office holders use your conclusions in ads or speeches? And somewhat relatedly, going back to Kathy's question about not using the word lie, which I understand, it seems to me that as harsh as lie is, misleading is fairly, to accuse somebody of being misleading isn't like as damning a charge. And I wonder if you have other words in between them that you use.
Well, on the first one, yes, they use our work and the work of other fact checkers in attack ads. That so-and-so said that their statements are false and their ads are false. So they are weaponizing fact checking, which is a concern among fact checkers that this is happening. We do call them out if they get it wrong, though. So, and that is something that will force them to to have to deal with that. So we're on the lookout for that and try to, nip it in the bud as soon as we see it. And the second part about, there are many different levels of, in fact, we have something at the bottom of each story now that'll give kind of a label to what our conclusion was. No evidence, spins the facts, distorts the facts, misleading, false. We don't have pants on fire or anything like that. Because again, we're trying to be a little more neutral in our language here and trying to be inclusive. But we have gradations of, but if something's false, it's false. It's not mostly false or misleading. It's false, and that's pretty much the harshest outcome you're going to get.
I apologize if this question is irrelevant because this may not be the field that you get into. Because you said you're really interested in public policy, basically. But I'm wondering if you would ever get involved in these allegations against the present Supreme Court nominee Kavanaugh. I mean, because now they say, a second person has come forward and the attorney for Stormy Daniels has brought a third person. But in the case of the second person, it was reported in the New Yorker. And then I read today online that the New York Times tried to verify her story and could find no one who would substantiate it. And she herself has said that she's not sure it was Kavanaugh.
Right.
So, I mean, that story is already out there. It's going to be hard to correct. But is that the kind of thing that you would ever get involved in or not?
Generally, no. What we would get involved in is fact-checking a statement that's made about this incident. So not fact-checking or doing, independent research unless someone distorts that information. So if one or the other side presents the information that we know to be reported in the public sphere, that they misrepresented that information, then we would call them out for it. But in terms of trying to track down, whether this woman is accurate in her story or not, we wouldn't do that.
But if anybody raised a question about this woman, I mean,
Right.
would you then refer to the New York Times investigation that they had done? versus
Yeah, we would lay out, here's,
Add any proof?
right, that's what we would do. We would just lay out, here's what we know about this case. And I see as one of the roles that we have is taking all the information that's out there and distilling it into one piece so people can get it in one article rather than have to go to the New Yorker and the New York Times and all the different sources, pulling it all together and presenting it.
Do you ever go into where misinformation comes from? In other words, trying to not only say, is it misinformation or not, but where did it come from?
Yes, there are two different ways of going about that. One is if it's a statement that's made by a politician, we're going to them for the source of their information. So then we're looking at a report that was put together by a think tank, and we're looking at their methodology that they used to come up with that report, to come up with this data point or argument that's being made, and then assess the accuracy of that report. So we're going to the source of the information that is being misrepresented or is just flat out, misinformation. Secondly, we do, since December of 2016, we started working with Facebook on this initiative that they have with U.S. fact checkers. We're one of 5 that fact checks these fake news stories that circulate online, on Facebook, on Twitter. In those cases, we can sometimes track down where that original statement came from. Just recently we did one that was, Gateway Pundit was the first organization to write about it. Some of the stuff comes from websites that we don't know who owns them because there's no About Us page, there's no author on the story, there's no publisher, we don't know who they are. They're organized in some foreign country. But we can say that that's where it came from, but we don't know who they are. So yeah, we will track it down whenever we can.
And is that useful to? Sorry. Is that useful to people in believing the fact check if they were inclined not to?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them. But I hope it is that, if they're getting information from some, bogus website in, Macedonia, I don't know, wherever from. So, yeah, I don't know.
I'm just curious, have you ever surveyed the political affiliations of your people who come to your site?
The last time we did that was after the 2012 election. And it's mostly Democrats and independents.
So you're preaching to the choir, essentially.
Yeah. Well, there's a I forget what the percentage was, so I don't want to throw it out, but there was a percentage of Republicans. It wasn't, I don't want to throw out a number, I don't know what it was, but the encouraging thing is that most of them identified as being independents. So, self-identified.
Really quick, but you said a statement. There's a decreasing lack of trust in media. I think you meant increasing lack of trust.
Yeah.
Okay, just want to check on that. If I were to go to your website for the first time and say you had a story where you, like the example you gave was Trump said 12 misstatements and you'd already covered 9, would you somehow note those just so I would know as a first-time reader those are covered elsewhere in the...
We do on his major speeches, so if he's given a State of the Union address or he's given an address to the nation, we will go through every single claim in there and have a little repeat section at the bottom of our story that lists them. If it's a speech that he gives in Missouri or one of these Make America Great rallies, we don't, because it's just not enough. The audience isn't that big, frankly. So we'll just focus on any of the new things that to write about.
And how do you feel about PBS NewsHour? I mean,
I love them.
Yeah, okay.
Hello.
Hey, hello.
I'm sorry, just listening. How do you feel about the new landscape of anonymous op-eds and, what's your stake in there in terms of it shaking up Oval Office discussions and also at the same time driving a few policy decisions?
I missed the first part of that.
The anonymous op-eds.
Oh, the anonymous op-ed that was written in the New York Times? Oh, okay. Well, I don't really have any opinion on it. I'd like to know who it was and how senior the senior official is. There's now Lindsey Graham's calling for an investigation of this overthrow of the government from within. I really don't have an opinion on it. It's just not something that really, I'm interested in it, but it doesn't affect me in terms of my work.
To the issue of anonymous, either writers or, in this instance, sources, I'm curious when news organizations seem to be relying more and more on anonymous sources, highly placed within the White House or close to the Trump administration or to the president himself. I'm curious, what is the news value today of anonymous sources, and does that affect the facts as they are presented, since they are so easily targeted by the victims of stories?
Right. Well, anonymous sources are very valuable, and this is where the trust in media comes in. You have to trust that media outlet knows who they're talking to, and this source has been accurate in providing information in the past. So I think, when you look at the Washington Post and the New York Times, they have a record of writing stories based on anonymous sources that turns out to be accurate. A lot of we did a story just about all the times Trump called articles fake news that turned out to be true. At the time they're written, they're easily attacked because, this is an anonymous source, and then it turns out to be accurate. And it depends on what information you're getting from the anonymous source, too. If this is documents that can go to proving the point of the article, like there was one time where someone had gotten a transcript of a call that the president had with the president of Australia? Mexico? Oh, that too, yeah. There's a lot of leaks in that White House. But, that was accurate information that was provided. So it was from an anonymous source, but it was accurate information. And it was proved to be accurate by the information that they got from Mexico, too. So it depends, and that's part of the challenge for everybody is to, the trust that we place in media organizations.
A bit of a personal question. If you go to a party or a social event, you must get backed into a corner. Yeah. How do you get out of it?
Well, I just went to my cousin's 65th birthday party on Saturday, so I can give you some live examples. I do it the same way that I would do it, dealing with the facts that we write about. So a uncle that shall remain nameless was talking about, some CNN, well, I think he didn't know his name, but it turned out to be Jim Acosta, who was attacking the White House, then he made a name for himself, and then now he's one of the commentators on CNN. He's not in the White House anymore, and he was going on and on about that. Doesn't like CNN. Watches Fox News. And, I was like, well, as I said before, shut cable off, they all have people who are making money off of this situation that we're all living in. They're all espousing their opinions and their comments, blurring the lines between fact and truth. So it's not just CNN, and I think Jim Acosta is a great reporter. I didn't tell him that, but I said that this is true for all the media. It's not just CNN. It's MSNBC. It's Fox News. I can give them So what I try to do is diffuse the situation and talk about it in broader terms than just this one thing. You know? And, you know, he also went on about Maxine Waters. Well, Maxine Waters is not a very consequential member of Congress, particularly now that they're in the minority. So, but, you know, the news outlets will create these villains, you know, whether it's Nancy Pelosi or Maxine Waters or whomever it is. And it's just, it's not real. You know, she's not a very influential member of Congress, so why are we talking about her?
Hi, thanks for taking my question.
Student.
You mentioned, yeah. You mentioned that Democrats tend to trust fact-checking outlets more than Republicans, and you said the last time a study was conducted on that was prior to the Trump era. I can't imagine that that's got much better.
Probably not.
But why do you think that is? Why do you think that conservatives tend to have a higher level of distrust in those services?
Well, you should read How the Right Lost Its Mind, which is a book by Charlie Sykes. Charlie Stiles I used to work with, as Joe Donahue knows back there. So he wrote a book that talked about how the conservative media has been having this steady attack on mainstream media, and it's been going on for a long time, and he was part of it, as he acknowledges. And it had a corrosive effect on people's trust in the media. And you know, now we have a president who's exacerbated that. So you know, it's not surprising that we would see this. And the book is a great read. And Charlie, by the way, thinks that we're the best fact-checking organization out there. So it's true, you can look it up.
Just the last question.
I just wanted to ask about, in global terms, do you think there's need for institutions like the United Nations to fund fact-checking organizations such as yourself? The example that comes to mind is I heard of during the Iraq War, before it, someone came out with a report of soldiers that came into a hospital, I believe it was in Kuwait or one of the Middle Eastern areas, and claimed that the soldiers took babies out of the incubators and laid them in the street. And it turned out that this was a false statement, and she was the daughter of someone connected with the, so she pretty much just completely made a false statement. And maybe you'll disagree with me, maybe you'll agree, but as I see it, the work that you do in your daily life is much of the front lines in the trenches work, and as a more, for a future of, because as I'm thinking about it, the information age has been a long one that we've been in for a while, and even 100 years ago, someone in a room the size of this, one editor could have published 500 papers in a day saying whatever they would like, and distribute them in the streets of Manhattan, whether true or whether fact-checked at all. And maybe it's just coming to a head in the public perspective and overwhelming the public now. This is why this is a tribulating time in terms of journalism. So I just wanted to ask about if you believe there is need for, so if you would agree that you are the person in the front trenches working the grunt work, as no offense,
oh no,
everyone,
trust me,
every field
wouldn't
needs
encourage
it.
you to go into it.
But in terms of what should the generals be doing for a global order of finding balance in information through the sources that we have, social media, and all of the information age, so we could be balanced and in harmony?
Well, I don't think it's a good idea for governments to fund fact-checking operations. That's a slippery slope. In Australia, they have an great fact-checking organization, and they wound up becoming the political football It's like, NPR and PBS here, where every once in a while, somebody wants to get rid of Sesame Street. So it's a dangerous thing, in my opinion, for governments to fund fact-checking operations. On the other hand, the example you give of the babies in incubators being taken out, that's something for the UN to investigate. They have investigators to do that kind of work. It's not fact-checking. That's serious, crimes that are being committed, if they are being committed, and somebody needs to investigate them, and that would be the UN or some international organization. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. But thank you, everybody, for so many questions. It was great.